Hi, everyone. It's Cricket Barrientos with Sounds of Autism. And today we're going to be talking about our Responders Unite program. I'm super excited to introduce to you Corina Whalen. She's with the Litchfield School District. You know, we've been working with them for over 11 years, thanks to Gina DeCoste and their whole administration. And today we have a lot of exciting things to tell you, but she is here today to just explain to you a tool that she's using with law enforcement to make their jobs easier and more successful to get to the result of a crisis intervention. So Corina, nice to meet you again, and thank you for being a part of this. We're so excited to have you. Please share a little bit about yourself and tell us about your program and what you're doing.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. So like you mentioned, my name is Corina Whalen. I am a behavior coach here at in the Litchfield School District at Scott Libby Elementary School. I've been here for a few years now. This is kind of a second career path for me. Prior to that, I was working in juvenile corrections, which kind of led me to where I'm at right now. I went back to school and, got a degree in adolescent disorders and kind of focusing in on that trauma piece and the different, the different things our children struggle with daily that present themselves very commonly first in our schools, in those young elementary ages. So because of that, I kind of got a proactive feel here at Scott Libby, and I really felt like I was finally reaching kids before they got to that level of, really needing that in-depth support, that maybe it was, not too late, but really hard to relearn that skill, to rewire that brain at those older ages. So kind of a long story short, I've been here, like I said, for maybe 4 years now, and I noticed, just that we have all this amazing knowledge that we get in our professional developments, in our trainings, all the things that, we're so blessed as teachers to have. And these skills that they give, myself these opportunities to go to these amazing trainings with these, doctors and specialists that have all this knowledge in mental health, so that we can come back and train our teachers and do best practices in our classrooms to create these, safe environments so that kids can really thrive and learn. So I had a situation where we had some, first responders out, kind of a, just a fluke thing one day with some fire alarms and whatnot. And I just really noticed that, as they were great with the kids, but they really needed that extra support. After we got out of the room, they were like, asking me so many questions. And I thought, wow, you get all this training probably, but do you really have the opportunity to implement it? Do you have the opportunity to practice it? Or is it more of just a crisis response? You get out to a call or you respond to, a situation, and you kind of have to go back and remember all this training or this information that you had and try to implement it in the moment. And that can be really tricky and really hard. So I reached out to some amazing people in our district, and I said, how do I get in touch? Or how do I, get in touch with the people that make these trainings happen with our first responders? And how do I give them all the tools that I have to make their jobs easier, but also to create safe environments for not just them, but for the families they're responding to, so that when they show up in your home or they show up to a call, and you have that safe feeling that this officer or this first responder knows what they're doing with your vulnerable child in that moment. So I got in touch with one of the SRO officers, Sergeant Granis at Buckeye PD. And we've been talking and exchanging information and kind of going back and forth. So finally, we had a great opportunity to have them out at our school. And so I think it was about maybe 5 officers that came out. We provided the department with communication boards. So just very, generic. You can get them off of just about any Google search you go on or anything like that. Just to kind of ones that we use here in our schools. Front to back, I gave them that to add to what they were already creating with their crisis prevention team, sensory bins. But I gave them a real quick rundown in our conference room, just how our children respond with using these visuals, why visuals are important, and not just for children, that have, are on the spectrum or children with different disorders, but any child you come across or even adult in crisis. How the brain kind of we start processing information from our brainstem, so the lower parts of our brain first. And then as we feel safe, we start to use those upper parts of our brain, so that prefrontal cortex. And so I explained all of that to these officers, but I explained how just something so familiar and comforting as seeing a symbol or a sign that you recognize in that brainstem can upshift a child in crisis to be able to access that higher part of your brain, which leads to, higher thinking and calmer responses. And then that's when, as the adult in the room, you can really help them self-regulate and get, to that safe ending result that you're hoping for. So I taught them this and I showed them this, and, I showed them how simple it was to prompt a child in crisis with this simple sheet here. But then I thought, we're going into the classrooms. I have the great privilege of having 2 inclusion classes on my campus. And what a great resource to bring in the officers into the classroom, not just for them, which is a huge benefit, right? To practice these skills in the moment, but for our students who may not always have the opportunity to have a fun interaction and build that connection with a first responder. Most of the time, children's first initial reactions or, introductions to first responders are in a traumatic situation or a crisis. So this gives them the opportunity to have a proactive, connection building. And then the officers get the chance to not only be in our communities and in with our amazing children, but they also get the chance to practice the skills that that we're teaching them. So you'll see some pictures here on some amazing officers. So they came in, we did the training, we talked about the boards. I talked about a lot of the different neural pathway development with the younger students and how that works and how, our executive state, those different parts of our brain and how to kind of really interact with children in crisis. And then the magical part of it, though, was we went into the classroom and we did it in a fun setting. So we started with reading a book in our older, our grades 3 through 5. So the officers that went in there got to read a story just to kind of have some fun. In the younger kindergarten through 3rd grade, they got to color with the officers. So I had little coloring sheets with the officers' pictures, and the officers sat down at the tables and colored. But during that whole process, they had their communication boards. And the great thing, too, was that our students that use communication devices such as their iPads and things like that, they had those ready and out. And so you'll see in some of the photos, the children were communicating to the officers when the officers were asking them questions with their devices. The other, off onto the left, the officer in that picture, I remember when we got back into the conference room and we were kind of debriefing in a sense of what they saw, and they were asking me questions and kind of how they use the boards. He said to me, the most amazing thing, he said, I took the board out, and he was talking to one of our students that is completely nonverbal. And he said, I handed him the board, but he took my finger. He took a hold of my finger and started pointing to the pictures, answering my questions. And you'll see at the bottom of one of the pictures was colors. He was pointing to the color he wanted me to pick up to color the picture with him. And I said, absolutely, like, it's amazing. And he said, I've never experienced something like that. Like how quickly all I did was hand him this board and he knew exactly what to do and exactly what he wanted. He just didn't have the words. So I gave him the words by giving him these pictures. And I said, 100%, like that's exactly what the goal of this was, is to show the officers in the moment in a fun setting that's not stressful, that they're not, trying to think through all their protocols, but just a fun environment where they can practice the skills that we're teaching. And it was incredibly successful. On the PowerPoint here, I included some of the responses from their Facebook post, just the community's responses, which I thought were really good. It was just, talking about proactive policing and really addressing those vulnerable members of our community and reaching them in a way that shows that, we really do want to empower our first responders with the skills that we have. And so that's kind of what the idea behind this was just to take the knowledge that I'm blessed to have, been given, and give that to the people that are using it day in and day out as well. Education isn't the only population that, needs this. It's our first responders in those crisis situations that, those jobs that are a lot harder than, we get the fun end of it, the learning and the fun environment, and they get the hard work, the response to the hard situations.
Corina, first of all, great job, and great job to the Buckeye Police Department. To be honest with you, all of the police departments in the West Valley that we have worked with so far, and the military base, Luke Air Force, security forces, everybody's looking for solutions to make their job better and more successful for the end result to be a safe end result, right? And so if we know, right, because we work with vulnerable populations that need institutionalized life to be modified. And you said a couple of things, and I want to share with you some of the learnings that I had. My son is now 20 years old, almost 21. And when Landon was going through his most severe time at 15 years old, puberty's kicking in, and he's having a spiral. He's spiraling down to the point where we had to hospitalize him for a few days. And he had to be on meds after that, right? And here's me, a mom, going, wow, this school's doing such a great job. This district's doing such a great job. Landon will definitely have an independent, normal life. And then all of a sudden this happens, and now you're rethinking things, right? And I always tell parents, I go, never assume that right now what you're seeing is going to be what it is, right? So when we had to take him into the psychologist before he went into the hospital, the doctor started working with him on bio and neural feedback. And I didn't understand what that meant, but they would put the little dots on his head, and then they would put the little thing on his finger to check his pulse. And what they're watching is they're watching your pulse or your heart rate. And what the doctor is teaching Landon is to learn how to calm his body when he's in stress or anxiety. And I was like, wow, this would be a great exercise for my husband and his job as well, because how many times do you go to a call and your heightened, is here, and then all of a sudden you need to go to the next call, and you have to like go from, being this officer of like a heightened awareness to, now you got to be very compassionate and empathetic. So it's an exercise that really has to be addressed. So I asked the doctor, I said, Landon said this is not working, and we've gone to you now 3 or 4 times. Can you explain to me what we're doing? And he said, what we're doing is basically resetting a part of your body that teaches you how to cope or to de-escalate yourself. And these kids stim, but if it's in crisis, sometimes stimming is the secondary of that de-escalation. The first of that de-escalation is that they have to change the picture in their mind. And so with this process, it's teaching Landon how to learn to breathe from his gut in his diaphragm the proper way, right? And once he knows how to do that, for how long he needs to do that to really reset his parasympathetic. And when that happens, especially like you think of people with PTSD or severe anxiety or OCD, this is a great training tool. And I'm like, everybody needs to learn this. Most of us don't. And then, we get older and we're like, oh my God, I have so much anxiety and this and that. A lot of that's this, right? So changing the picture is basically taking the brain and focusing on something else with your eyes, focusing on something else, or if you're blind, touching something else, right? Because that would change it to something other than what's in their mind. And so when Landon would go through trauma, we would have to remind him to change the picture. And it doesn't matter. He could stare at anything as long as his mind is focusing on something else. And then after he did that, he would go outside and he would stim, which is pacing back and forth, and flap his hands to calm himself. And sometimes he would listen to music, and sometimes he said, I just need to clear my mind. I can't listen to anything because my sensory is overloaded. And it's important because I'm going to tell you, as an adult now, because we did that exercise and these types of things, Landon today can self-regulate independently when he needs to cope, and he will verbalize that with me. Why is that important? Because now when he goes to a job and he's struggling, he needs to ask for help, and he knows how to do that. But it doesn't mean our community knows what that means. And that's why we include community leaders, and we talk about responders, and we talk about educational leaders, because not everybody understands that language. What you've learned to do through all of your careers is take typical life and modify the way we approach it, because the individuals we work with is really the third tier of a community. You have your community, everyday life. Everybody knows how to do that because we learned that from day one. And then you have your secondary, which is integrating into society, and how are you supposed to act outside of there? We kind of worked on that conditioning process, for me, 53 years. But when it comes to crisis, your third tier, that's what our focus needs to be. And that's why we're addressing these issues, is because crisis doesn't have direction. You can try to do it the same way, and your experiences will help you overcome it. But if you cannot modify to provide a safe environment for those that need extra support, that would be my first suggestion for you as a city leader, a community leader, right? Educator, whatever. You have to figure out what Corina's talking about first so that you can do it the right way. You become the student again. And people sometimes struggle with that because they think, well, I have 40 years in the business. It doesn't mean that you understand. I know that because I'm 53 and I'm learning every day.
Well, even as an adult getting, coming into this career, teaching self-regulation. So something amazing that Litchfield School District is doing is that we're teaching our adults first. So we're adult centered and we're teaching, I get the amazing privilege as a behavior coach to teach all the adults interacting with your children how to self-regulate, but also how to respond to a child in crisis. But that begins with the adult first. If I am not regulated and I am not in that higher center of my brain and responding, talking to a child in crisis, that child can never regulate any higher than I am. So as an officer, if you're going from call to call and you haven't had the opportunity to self-regulate between, and you go from one crisis to another without taking that moment, what happens is that you go in an emotional state to your next call and you can't regulate that person in front of you any higher than where you're at. So we know that with brain science. And so that's the amazing thing that we're teaching. The same thing with children is that, if I'm coming in as the adult with the tools and I am in my higher part of my brain and I am operating out of that, I know that I can help regulate that child and teaching that. So we teach that first and foremost. We teach the kids their different brain states. We teach them exactly, what your body's telling you through behavior, because we know that all behavior, regardless of what it is communicating something. So I think one of the huge things that our first responders, need the most, support in is understanding that what is happening in front of me. First of all, it's not happening to me, it's happening in front of me. And then what is that behavior communicating to me? What is that need that I need to meet? So by prompting with these boards and by prompting with things that our children are used to seeing in their safe environments here at school, we bring that connection, we bridge that gap, and we create a safe environment right there in that moment between that officer and that child in crisis. It's amazing to see, it's amazing to watch, but it's also the most amazing thing is giving these first responders that opportunity with, people that are specialists in it. We do this every day. And so by giving them that opportunity to be with us in the moment with these children, they can learn far, of course, this is my opinion, but far better than, reading a training manual or going to, a different training. Like when you're in that moment, it's so magical, the skills that you can build when you're visualizing it and seeing it happening in front of you.
Well, and I noticed that because when I started working with, just these different responders and people in the business, one, it's hard to go to trainings all the time. You're overtrained sometimes, right? Where this is a lot more fun for them to learn how to do, right? Because they're coming and having hands-on, right? And that's how this is the job of officers, first responders. They're hands-on, responding. And so with these individuals, these kids, you mentioned the kid took the hand of the officer and pointed with his finger. We call that hand over hand, right? We're teaching them. We're verbal, visual. These are all ways when you have kids that are under all the therapies that they go through. These are different suggestions that are made, and they're doing this all day, whether it's in school or at home. They're being taught through verbal, visual, prompted, independent, what skills. So just allow these kids, give them enough time, and they'll show you how they look.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened in that classroom. Was the officers were shown by, taught by these children. They got to watch them use, the kids refer to them as their talkers, but their iPads with, that their communication devices. And I showed them how, the pictures might be slightly different or what they have, but how they can build the sentences, how they can answer your questions, how they can make it, read it off to you. And, they were really happy to see it in action. And then the other thing that Buckeye and I are doing is, I told them it doesn't have to be, I know trainings and times are really hard to come across. We have the same thing in the education field. There's not a lot of time. But I said, pop in, you're in our community all day, different shifts. Pop into the school and walk around, inviting them all the time. They're coming back again. We're also going over to White Tank's facility next door, with some of our more, different behaviors and things, so that they can play some basketball and kind of get, in that safe environment, that fun, safe environment, get to know the kids, but also get to witness some of those behaviors and how they're communicating and how we as the educators respond to those behaviors. So, I really want that to be a modeling opportunity for them, where they see, someone like myself with these trainings, how I communicate and respond to a crisis situation, and how I, self-regulate a child in front of me in crisis, because those are the trainings that I spend, I dedicate my life to, is learning, how to respond to a child in crisis. So that is a great opportunity, a modeling opportunity. And I said, 10 minutes, 10 minutes in a classroom, or 10 minutes at recess, I told them, doesn't matter. You just pop in. We're here, every day, Monday through Friday. So come on in. And so Buckeye has done an amazing job with taking advantage of what we have to offer. And I just hope it grows. And I hope that, other departments, and if it's not something that's in your community already, in your area, reach out and, let us help them develop that, or let us help them create something with, in partnership with their schools and their community as well, so that, they have access to all of that brilliance that, they have brilliance and we have brilliance. Let's put it together. Let's create, unity.